In this video, we will talk about the Deuteronomistic history, beginning with an introduction to what the Deuteronomistic history is and what books it contains. In part 1, which is this video, we will talk about the books of Joshua and Judges, including their structure, themes, and key terms to know. The Deuteronomistic history is a term used by scholars to talk about 4 books in the Hebrew Bible. This encompasses the former prophets, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. When we talk about Samuel and Kings, we are talking about both 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings. In original manuscripts, there was no distinction between the two. These texts were later split up into 2 separate parts. The Deuteronomistic history covers the span between the book of Deuteronomy and the latter prophets. What we see here is the story of the Israelites making the journey into Canaan and taking over the promised land and settling it. The Deuteronomistic history is a post-exilic text, meaning it is written after 586 BCE when the Jews were exiled from Jerusalem. Some of the major themes that we see here are exclusive worship of Yahweh, centralized worship at the temple in Jerusalem, and an emphasis on the Davidic covenant. You might recall that some of these themes are the same for the book of Deuteronomy as well. Many scholars claim that Deuteronomy is part of the Deuteronomistic history and acts like an introduction or prologue to the text. There are variations on the idea of authorship of the Deuteronomistic history, but many scholars claim that it was written by one person or one group of people, rather than separate compositions for each book. This video will cover the first 2 books of the Deuteronomistic history, while part 2 will cover Samuel and Kings. Let's begin with the book of Joshua. The book of Joshua picks up right where Deuteronomy leaves off, and tells a continuation of the journey of the Israelites to the Promised Land. This occurs after the death of Moses, and Joshua takes over for Moses as the leader of the Israelites. Books of the Hebrew Bible are often named for the people who are the central figures, as you can see here, not necessarily the authors of the book. The purpose of the book of Joshua is to explain the interpreted history of the conquest of Canaan. Later in the book, it also talks about the division of land, essentially how to split the land of Canaan between the Israelite tribes. There are a few major themes that we see in the book of Joshua. First, we see Joshua as a type of Moses. Type here refers to typology, which is an idea that some figures have specific characteristics or stories that are recapped by later figures in the Bible, or perhaps foreshadowed. For Joshua, we see stories of him miraculously parting the Jordan River, like Moses does with the Red or Reed Sea, as well as taking the Israelites closer to the Promised Land, as Moses does. The importance of the law is also essential to the book of Joshua, as following the book of Deuteronomy, the law is incredibly important for the Israelites in understanding how to relate to God and how to live an everyday life as they journey to the Promised Land. Another important theme that we see is harem. In Hebrew, harem means something like destruction, but can also mean devotion. Many people interpret this as the ban. Essentially, the idea of harem is that everyone conquered in battle should be killed and their property should be burned. When the Israelites conquer any city or civilization, they're supposed to utterly destroy it as a way of devoting themselves to God. Let's turn our attention to the book of Judges now. The book of Judges comes after the book of Joshua and provides parallel narratives of the judges. These parallel narratives are what we call cycles, because each has a very similar storyline, bringing order to the Israelites when the judge takes over, then the death of the judge bringing chaos. There are a couple key terms to think about when we talk about the Book of Judges. The first of these, of course, is the term judge. In the modern day, we often think of judge as somebody who rules over court settings, deciding who is guilty and who is not. This term should be thrown out to some extent. A biblical judge was someone who acted as a ruler, in a sense like a tribal chief. They were not quite a king, but as Coogan describes, were a ruler or a military leader, as well as someone who presided over legal hearings. Judges tells the story of these Israelites having these judges, or these tribal chiefs who acted as military leaders, though they occasionally did hear court cases. Another important term is Nazirite. Nazirite comes from the Hebrew word nazir, which means to separate or set apart. A Nazirite was an Israelite who took a vow to not cut their hair and not to drink alcohol. Samson, of course, is an excellent example of this. His power comes from his Nazirite vow, which, as you can see in this picture, is upheld by not cutting his hair. The book of Judges is important as we move into the book of Samuel and Kings, because it establishes a couple things. First, the book of Judges explains why the Israelites need steady leadership, and looks forward to the establishment of the monarchy. Since each judge dying brings chaos to the people until a new judge is chosen, the judges need steady leadership to continue this order for the nation of Israel. Second, it shows why historically Israel was continuously conquered. In history, we see that Israel was conquered several times and was a relatively small nation. The book of Judges explains this, as it shows the interaction of these judges with various outside people groups, like the Moabites and the Philistines. Each time a judge died, other nations would take over the Israelites. So this text acts as an explanation for that. Now that we've reached the end of this video, you should be able to explain the structure and concerns of the Deuteronomistic history, identify the themes of the book of Joshua and how they are used, and describe the structure and importance of the book of Judges.